Mr. President, allow me to extend a heartfelt congratulations to you on your elevation to the position of President of the Senate. And Mr. President, let me take this opportunity to recognize and congratulate the Honorable Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, SC, for not being the first, but second time around as a female Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. President, I sat here and kind of amazed. Sometimes I'm just amazed at what I had to listen to this morning. For a moment, sometimes I believe that there's something called BIR and customs that descended from heaven. And it's just taking advantage of all of us. And we had to find some way around it. Some persons talk about the need to treat with change. And the whole issue of accepting change. The change I would like persons to accept, that change took place on April 28, 2025. And that change is what we are here to discuss. A change in policy. BIR. I listened to Senator Dan Paul. He made reference to Dean's diagnostic report. He also made reference to TTRA report. And all these things list a number of issues that affect BIR and customs and excise. We got that. I think he also mentioned that he was almost in charge throughout the whole time that all these problems existed. I think the question is, what have we done about it? Yes, you have a situation, BIR and customs. It appears on a previous administration that appeared not to learn a lesson, because the Honorable Dan Paul mentioned it's in 2010. This whole situation was alive and well in terms of TTRA. And he also mentioned there was an election. You know what happened after this same TTRA, an election? That administration lost the election in 2010. Why? Because the people rejected that policy as it relates to treating with the issues mentioned with BIR and custom and excise. It is clear. But putting the old people like stick break in the air. They choose not to ignore the people. And again, came back with TTRA. And again, they would have lost the election. Vox Populi, Vox Dei, the voice of the people, the voice of God. You can't ignore that. This is a democracy.
Amen.
That's what we live in.
Amen.
It's a democracy. And I want to say more than that. when we try to hold out that we have issues with BIR and customs, again, like it's some kind of super creature that we all have to look up in fear of. All the reports deal with basic, simple issues. And the issues caused deliberately, in many instances, by the political administration. Mr. President, they're talking about understaffing. They're talking about under-resourcing. A deliberate ill-treatment of the staff of BIR and Customs by that then administration. There's a true dynasty. It was the PNM. And yes, they got rid of the PNM. People did remove that dynasty. And not in small measure. Come, let's learn something. It's a 3/5 majority this side has because of the people taking a decision Mr. President, I want to remind, if you want to understand why we are where we are, that in terms of self-governance, it's 69 years we had this. Since 1956, we had this thing called self-governance. Of the 69 years, the People National Movement had stewardship of this country for 53 of the 69 years. So behave like we know why things are happening and what's wrong, and when they have issues in the context of this country, whatever institution, 53 of those years, as contrasted with the UNC, 11. Only 11 years. NAR5, they have 53 years. And suddenly they're listing problems up with institution and behaving like it came from heaven. Let me focus on, I almost want to deal with this anti-worker and anti-PSA bit. And I know the Senator Dan Paul making reference to a MOU, but then he has a disclaimer. It wasn't signed. My God, how does a MOU if it wasn't signed? Of what value if something wasn't signed, you could bring it here? It means that no one agreed. That's a piece of paper that he was reading from. And it's unfortunate that he will use that to try to influence people. We're in an unfortunate place. Mr. Speaker. Mr. President. Today I stand in strong support of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Repeal Bill 2025. My contribution to this debate rests on principle, policy, and evidence. But above all, it rests on the will of the people, a sovereign voice that echoed resoundingly on April 28th of this year. The matter before us is not just one of repealing a legislative artifact. It is a question of how we govern, how we treat workers, of how we balance efficiency with equity. It's about the soul of our public service and the future of fair, transparent tax administration in our nation. Mr. Speaker, I want to say it's not only 53 years that they run this place, They had situation over 53 years. And you know what we had? they had stewardship over 2 oil booms. We must never forget that. From 1972 to 1983, oil boom. The other saying money was no problem. That is what this country had. And then we had an oil boom in 1999 to 2008.
Where the money gone?
Money flowed, billions of dollars. And they come here unashamedly and speak about defects in our public institutions. And what's worse than that is where they frame this argument as though it's one about revenue. That's how they frame it, It's about some $10 billion out there that we're trying to get our hands on. And the silver bullet to that money is TTRA. Mr. President, without a vision, a people perish. We are here today because of the visionless P&M. This crisis that has been manufactured based on some hypothetical $10 billion that hang out there to be collected. Hypothetical $10 billion. It is premised upon a false equivalence. A false equivalence that they have TTRA equals more revenue, that we'll be able to collect more. TTRA equals the collection of more revenue. And they have everyone taking that as a given. Mr. President, that's not so.
Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence?
Mr. President, that is not so. That doesn't exist. And I'm not saying so because I feel like saying so.
The evidence.
Mr. President, there are many studies done on semi-autonomous revenue authorities. I want to make reference to just 3. If you want to find out something, you have to go to the expert. And these are experts brought by the last administration. Exactly. All of these experts were brought by the last administration. They're all quite acquainted to them. One called Kidd and Crandall's. You know what Kidd and Crandall's? Didn't know about them.
It was signed?
Signed in 2009. They had them here. They brought them here. And Kidd and Crandall's, let me tell you what they said. I'm quoted. That they found no consistent evidence that the creation of a revenue authorities lead to increased revenue performance. They said that improvements stemmed from unrelated reforms or short-term gains that later eroded.
Say that again. Say that again.
But Kidd and Crandall's went further. They said that there is no objective analysis showing that countries with revenue authorities outperform countries without them. That's what the expert says.
But we've been irrelevant.
So this money, there's absolutely no correlation between a revenue authority and the collection of more revenue. But let's look at another one. Royal Dome 2017, their report. Hear what this next international recognized expert.
Another silent.
That they brought. That they brought.
He reviewed and found that such authorities frequently suffer from mission drift, that's revenue authorities, rising administrative costs, weak public oversight, and further found no evidence that such bodies systematically improve tax revenue or fiscal capacity.
Debate that.
But just maybe another one. Let's look at another one. Not one in 2017, not one in 2009, but one in 2023.
Who was the government then?
This is one that was commissioned in 2023 by the KNM government comrades.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
This person was used as part of the affidavit in the Theresa Dore versus the Attorney General. I'm talking about that's just the other day.
And is there affidavit?
Their affidavit.
No, say it not so.
And this expert is Professor Mickmore. That was utilized by them. And he did a report. Comrades, I use the word comrades because of force of habit.
Make it happen.
May feel uncomfortable, but my colleagues,
Make it happen.
senators,
We are your comrade.
I could call you a comrade, Senator Baptiste. But here's the difficulty I have. So this paper that was done by this professional, this international expert hired by the People's National Movement, did a report, and the report is addressed to the Permanent Secretary Minister of Finance. The report is dated the 17th of February 2023. Let me read from this report what the man said, this professor said.
Who's the permanent secretary?
He was in London.
He was in London.
Who was it here?
Who was?
I see it's addressed to one Nadira Leiter. And in the summary, the professors told the government of Trinidad and Tobago that the then government of Trinidad and Tobago, if we look at the evidence on the sum of recent experiences found around the globe, the creation of semi-autonomous revenue authorities taken alone on average has not led to increases in government revenue. What is all this about? What is all this about? As though there is something that they have stumbled onto. But moreover, this same professor, Mr. President, hear his words in a paper done after the days in 2023, also a regional paper done by the same Professor Mickmore. His summary, and I quote, "The success of tax administration lies less in autonomy than in the integrity, investment, and the internal modernization of core civil institutions." That's the expert. What is this about TTRA and billions of dollars? That equivalence is false. It simply does not exist. And therefore, we are down to one thing, a TADAC report and or a dean's report that lists inefficiencies in the public service. How then do we treat with it? Mr. President, I want to be clear. Taxation is not merely an accounting function. It is a profound expression of public policy. It reflects our collective agreement on how resources are to be raised, allocated, on who pays, who administers, and who decides. The UNC, in seeking a mandate during elections, articulated a clear policy that tax administration must be pursued within the public service, not in opposition to it. And it didn't make no secret. It says, and therefore, the TTRA Act must be repealed. That is what was the clear policy decision of this government as the way to treat with those issues as identified. As the expert agreed that you fixed your civil institution.
We agreed with the experts.
Dear expert. Mr. President, you know what? The electorate endorsed our decision. Overwhelmingly. The repeal of the TTRA Act is therefore not only a legislative decision, it is a democratic imperative. It is a mandate by the people and of the people.
PNM don't like that. Don't like democracy.
Mr. President, even if that isn't good enough to clearly be of the clear understanding that there is no relationship between TTRA and more revenue. Let's just get rid of that. That's a falsehood. Go, just put Google any amount of tax experts. Not one will support that as a position. It simply does not exist.
Yep.
But, you know, even if you somehow you want more reason for supporting this government that has adopted this policy and would have taken the position that whereas the last administration engaged in, they didn't want to fix it, they refused to fix it, may have engaged in the deliberate sabotaging of the BIR and Custom Division, and I'll get into that a little later. Even if that, you know, is one thing we should never forget, because by definition they say that's madness.
Doing the same thing.
To do the same thing over and over and expect a different result.
That's the PNM.
Mr. President, we in this country are no strangers to the allure of statutory authority model. But neither are we strangers to its consequences. Again, it is by definition madness to do the same thing and expect different results. Let's reflect on, we have heard this over and over again, All you remember something called the RHAs? Regional Health Authorities? You know that those things were born out of,
Semi-autonomous.
they were born out of the public service. Somebody some time ago, 1994 to be exact, 31 years ago, somebody said, hey, we could fix health in this country.
Take it out to
The problem is in the public service. And here what they do, they say, okay, we go restructure. And they go create something new.
the semi-autonomous.
And they end up with what? A regional health authority. Regional health authorities
Still worse.
all over. 31 years. Would any one of us say that that worked? It was the exact complaint about public service, public service, public service. And they create these new structures. You know the only thing they succeed in doing?
Transfer the problem.
Try to get rid of
Oversight.
trade unions in the environment and promote contract work, moving from decent work to indecent work, from permanent jobs to contract jobs. That's what they succeeded doing.
That was the plan.
And after 31 years, Mr. President,
And delivered nothing.
the regional health, which one of us? I mean, I recall Senator Bates. John Bates would have pointed out that she got a good experience in our healthcare. And she's right. That deserves coming to the parliament and making a boast because that is so infrequent.
It's not
That it must come. It's worthy of mentioning here. But that is not the truth. For the average person, you will only go to the public health institution 31 years after. You will only go to the public health institution if you must. You have to. Because if you can afford to go to St. Clair or the St. Augustine private hospital, you would go. And most, on the other side, might even decide to go elsewhere, another country, in furtherance of their health challenges, rather than stay here.
Rowley and coffee. Rowley.
Why would we, therefore, hold out that them kind of dismantling of the civil service and putting it under these authorities is the best thing since sliced bread? You have the NHA.
What evidence has it with?
Turn HDC. And now they further want to restructure HDC. They're restructuring the restructured. We have any improvement in treating with the housing crisis? Because we what? We move from
We will deal
the
with it.
public service to... You could go to Tourism Development Corporation. That was a big deal at one point in time to take it out of the public service and put it in. And then they shut it down and come with a next restructured version.
Guarani.
Mr. President, that approach to improving the level of service by engaging in vilifying public officers
Has failed every time.
and restructuring to these. Listen, you have TTRA. If you fail to invest in the human resources, you fail to invest in the technology, you fail to invest in training and development, guess what will happen with TTRA? Just what happened in the RHA, just what happened in the HGC. Because those are not the root problem. It's just the failure to invest.
What about the theft that's taking place now?
So that, Mr. President, the inescapable conclusion is that we cannot repeat the mistakes of the past and not understand we cannot do things the same way and expect different results. And if you fail to heed the mistakes of the past, you are doomed to repeat them. We must therefore repeal the TTRA Act, as promised. But worse than that, Mr. President, is that how this action of the previous government and this TTRA, how it affected the workers. Long before the act was passed, the PNM employed a deliberate strategy to render BIR and Custom and Excise divisions inefficient and ineffective by under-resourcing them, understaffing them, and underpaying the workers. This was followed by a deliberate strategy to paying the professionals within those divisions as impediment to progress. Public servants were described as inefficient, corrupt, and outdated. What signal does this send? That those who uphold our fiscal laws are unworthy of investment, that professionalism can be undermined for political expediency. Rather than empower them with better tools, we blame them, or they blame them, for systemic rot. Rather than address capacity gaps outlined in the 2017 TTRA report, they scapegoated the very individuals best placed to implement reforms. These were not, Mr. President, faceless bureaucrats. They were career officers, fathers, mothers, citizens who have faithfully served. Their loyalty should have been recognized, not ridiculed.
And respected.
They too are taxpayers. As taxpayers, they are shareholders of our country and deserve respect and regard as shareholders. But Mr. President, that was how they treated them before the act. But after the act was even worse. Mr. President, in the aftermath of the act's passage, what followed was not a smooth implementation guided by fairness or transparency, but rather a troubled pattern of administrative malpractice under Section 18 of the Act. We witnessed the PNM's deployment of coercive tactics designed to pressure employees into accepting transition terms they scarcely understood. Instead of engaging these workers with clarity and respect, the process was marred by opaque conditions and intimidation. Information, basic, fundamental information, was withheld or delayed. Employees were not provided with full disclosure of their rights, terms, and protections. Critical details that should have been accessible were kept out of reach, leaving those affected to navigate uncertainty without the benefit of proper counsel or representation, Mr. President. Even when formal requests were made by the PSA, the response was resistance, deflection, or silence. This is not merely an oversight. It is an affront to good governance and industrial justice.
Deliberate.
We cannot in good conscience normalize such treatment of our public servants. This government has a duty to uphold not just the letter of administrative procedure, but its spirit, anchored in fairness, clarity, and respect for people who keep our institutions running. Therefore, this TTRA Act must be repealed.
Rubbish.
Must be repealed.
Rubbish.
This TTRA Act also, Mr. President, runs afoul of the preamble of our Constitution, which calls on the people of Trinidad and Tobago to respect the principles of social justice and that labor should not be exploited or forced by economic necessity to operate in inhumane conditions, but that there should be an opportunity for advancement in the basic of recognition of merit, ability, and integrity. Mr. Speaker, with your leave, President, with your leave, Mr. President, with your leave, employees wrote, we're talking about the act, in terms of sexuality, the act would have been proclaimed on the 24th of April of 2023, with it becoming enforced from the 1st of May 2023. The representative of the workers came to the union asking, we have all these options, and the options were as follows. For those who may not know, and I'll do it quickly, to volunteer, a voluntary retirement. You could volunteer from the service, or you could transfer to the authority on no less favorable terms and conditions enjoyed by him in the public service, or you could transfer to the enforcement division on no less favorable terms, or you could transfer to the public service in an office commensurate with the office held by him in the public service, providing that what is available. And here the workers come and say to the union, what is the best? What am I being offered? Am I to what? Tick. I don't know what the best is. What do you mean by no less favorable? I don't know what that means. You know, when the union write the management and ask for explanation, we got absolutely nothing. The CPO would have said to the union, and I'm speaking intimately about what transpired, that he has to get some information from his Minister of Finance. Mr. President, workers on their own filed Freedom of Information Act, and this is in 1 year after. Look at the simple information that was asked by these workers who are asked to make a decision that could alter their lives and their livelihoods. They wrote the Ministry of Finance and asked about, one, an organizational structure, whether it existed. They asked about the officers, the salary ranges. And let me just cut to the chase. You know what the Ministry of Finance wrote and said to them? That there is no such document that represents an organizational structure for TTRA.
No, but this is irrelevant and irrelevant.
And they also would have said, about salary ranges or any such information. They wrote the TTRA directly, and the same thing was forthcoming. And these workers were then being told they must make a decision just like that, without any information. No one of us that have the basic rule in life, do unto others you have them, do unto you, could say that you could sanction that. We cannot sanction that. How we treat our public officers and how we treat our citizens. So that, Mr. President, this situation is a very unfortunate situation that we have had to deal with. Needless to mention that the approach by the government violated ILO Convention 87 and 98, which speaks to the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining. But when you have a situation where you move in person from where they have that right and putting them in a situation that removes that right from them, we go in the wrong direction. We are members of an ILO. We have signed up and commit to promoting
And that is going back.
the conventions.
That is going back.
That is going back.
We ratify those conventions, and yet you have a government.
Going back. Your time is up, but
So, Mr. President, let me thank you and thank the Senate And I close by simply saying the TTRA on its own does not equate to increase in tax revenue. The repeal of the TTRA Act is not a rejection of reform, it is a recommitment to reform done right.